Welcome to my latest podcast. My Just a View podcast is exactly that. It's just a view from me, Mike Foster, the entrepreneur's mentor. And for my podcast, I will be providing my views on matters that have either observed, or perhaps they're a selection of topics from the news, or they may be around topics off the back of conversations with other entrepreneurs. And today's theme is really, where I'll be looking at some topics where I found myself and seen others going, really? So what will I be covering today? Well, I'll be covering areas such as LinkedIn connection requests, social distancing, flaws within the support for vulnerable children, and pivoting your business. So the first question is, do people really make LinkedIn connection requests with a sales message? In recent weeks, I've found myself asking that question time and time again. So do people really expect me to say yes to a sales request and a request to be sold to? And I guess my question is, do people really get business from adding a sales message into their connection request without any attempt to build a relationship in some way with the person they're sending it to? Perhaps it's a new way to win new business in the new normal, but I've received numerous requests recently from people I don't know who are pitching their offering to me and asking me to connect with them to show interest. I just struggle with it personally, and I question whether that actually does work. Certainly doesn't work for me. I ignore those requests more or less immediately. And personally, I ignore any request from someone that I've not met or from someone who can't give me a few moments to include a genuine message as to why they want to be connected with me. Oh, and by the way, if you receive a request from someone in Oxfordshire saying that they know me and that I recommended you to connect with them, then I haven't. It's not the way that I make connections. I do that tends to be a personal introduction. I couldn't believe the cheek of this particular person. It was someone I knew and was connected with that I'm not anymore, and I won't be known to know. But they made this contact with my connections and really interested in terms of how they felt that they could mention me without even raising it with me in any particular way. So certainly an interesting approach, but in my opinion, flawed in so many ways. But it did get me thinking, and the reason why to include it in this podcast was, what is your LinkedIn approach to build connections, to develop relationships, and encourage people to lean towards you with interest? I'd certainly be interested in your thoughts, either by a comment or by dropping me a message. So the second question I want to look at is, do people really understand the purpose of social distancing? As a people person, no one more than me wants to get back to some sort of normality and to start meeting up with people and to be in groups soon. I certainly personally get an energy from that environment. I can't wait to get networking again, to get my networking groups back together in a similar environment. And I appreciate it's not going to be the same for many few months. It's obviously fantastic to see schools, shops, and some businesses starting to reopen again, and in some way restarting our economy. But really, do people just not get the information about social distancing? Despite all the hard work and the many pounds of investment by many of the businesses, and also the time commitment they've made, it's really disappointing to see so many people ignoring those social distancing guidelines. I suspect that the majority of these people who ignore the guidelines, who simply do not go home when social distancing is more or less impossible, as we've seen at some retail environments, then they've not heard of or seen up close how awful this COVID-19 actually is. And if they have lost someone, if they have not been able to hold the hand of someone in their final moments, or even not been able to visit a family member in hospital to comfort their suffering, then I suspect fewer, unfortunately still not everybody, would approach things in a very different way. It appears that people are willing to take a risk and to play Russian roulette with their own health, but not just their own health, but with others that they're likely to carry it towards. So I guess my feeling is, please respect the social distancing, and don't get me started, please don't get me started on all these campaign marches that are going on and that we're witnessing right now. That's perhaps for another podcast. But Many businesses, as we know, are suffering from lockdown. They're on their last legs. They need to get restarted and emerging from lockdown as soon as possible. And they're not going to be able to withstand a second lockdown. So let's all respect what the experts are telling us based on their research, their expertise. I appreciate on the horizon is some relaxing of the distancing, but let's appreciate what the guidelines currently are, and let's get business back to normal as soon as possible. The third question is whether the government are really not aware of the flaws in their support schemes for vulnerable children. Many of you will know that I've volunteered for a few years now, bringing together education providers and the local business community. And if I hear the same response from working in that environment or close to the education sector, then surely the government know that their schemes, even with the best intentions, do not always deliver to the right people. So, for example, let's take the free meals that are now being offered during the summer school holidays. I have massive admiration for Marcus Rashford and his campaign success that will help so many people. It's not because I'm a United fan, but because rightly so, the campaign is there to address the concerns about malnourishment and children being too hungry to concentrate in the school holidays to even receive a meal. And it's great news that in recent years, free school meals have been linked to lowering obesity levels and boosting the academic achievement for poorer pupils. Now, this is easy and extremely well managed at schools during term time, but come the holidays, come the lockdown, it's a very different story. If you didn't know, some families receive food parcels, but many families are issued with either an electronic voucher or a gift card worth £15 each week per disadvantaged child to spend at a local supermarket. For the summer holidays, that will be a payment that will cover a 6-week period. Now, however, surely there has to be a better way to distribute that support, such as the food parcels, and ensure that the objective is really met. Because in reality, many families are using those vouchers and the vulnerable children don't see the benefit and remain without sufficient meals. I hear a number of stories that it's common for a voucher value to be used to buy against alcohol or cigarettes. Now yes, that may be minority, but still, I'm sure, a large number. And I'm gobsmacked every single time I hear such a story, but I honestly appreciate the hardship and issues these families are experiencing. But without a better way, surely it's a never-ending cycle that will never get fixed. A link to this is the further supporting of disadvantaged pupils when we hear about the lack of technology being a barrier to the completion of homeschooling. In my previous podcast, I gave a view around homeschooling, but now I have a further view, something that truly irritates me. A recent article on the BBC News app reported that a third of the pupils were not engaging with set work and not completing their homeschooling. It was felt mainly due to the lack of access to technology, and it was reported that school leaders told the National Foundation for Educational Research that the limited or the no access to technology was a problem in around a quarter of the pupils. In fact, it's quoted at 23%. So I checked in with my education-based contacts to be told by all of them that the schools that they worked in had Chromebooks or laptops available by request, but not everyone who they felt was in a position of need actually requested one. Again, I was gobsmacked. Really? Why, if you needed one, would you not obtain one? I personally think I feel it's a kick in the teeth for the system, which is offering such a way to bridge the gap, and it's an offering that's provided to some and not utilised is a disappointment, especially whilst others have to pay for their own child's provision. I fear that the outcome will be, as a result, the government funding another voucher scheme to support the purchases of broadband and PCs for the home, as we've seen before. And again, I may be referencing the minority, but again, it's still a large number. But it again annoys me to hear how families have received a previous PC no longer having that PC now because they've sold it after their previous requirement. And again, we're in a situation where they're in need of support. Again, don't get me wrong, I appreciate this is a real serious issue and it has to be addressed, but my reason for the inclusion of these examples in this podcast is to highlight that some of our well-intended actions don't hit the mark or achieve their purpose. So when you're running your business and you've got all the best intentions in the world, please consider, do your research in terms of the particular outcome and is it meeting your purpose. And my final question for this podcast is, are you really pivoting your business for the right reason? During recent weeks and for many businesses, it's been a time when many of us have had a huge hit on our revenue, and the most overused term and latest buzzword in this period has been pivot. Pivot is a significant change of strategy and often developed in an innovative manner. The change ranges from either a minor change or a drastic change. The pivot is usually intended to help a business recover from a tough period or survive after experiencing new competition or other factors that makes the original business model unsustainable. And in a reaction to the pandemic outbreak and lockdown, I've seen some awesome pivots in recent weeks with positive early results, especially businesses taking their offering online with success. However, I've also seen and had jaw-dropping moments, hearing how businesses have pivoted their business without consulting their customers or undertaking any market research. I've heard many examples of businesses changing their offering because they believe it was the right thing to do, but without any consultation with their existing customers or their potential audience via any market research. So surprise, surprise, the pivot hasn't really worked, generated any relative revenue as a return on their investment of change. So why did they pivot, I guess we'd ask? Well, maybe because their revenue in their pipeline dried up and in panic mode, they made changes. Now, of course, many businesses have experienced this, but often not because of their offering, but because their customers and their prospects were not able to buy or not in a position to buy. And I believe that due to the overuse of this new buzzword, pivot, many businesses felt that they had to do something and follow suit with a pivot rather than just review their business in other ways. I always say that your product development should always align with your market development so that your product fits the market, and then it's factual that there is a market of buyers who are willing to part with their money once the offering is complete. So I encourage you to think about how your product and marketing development is in sync and how you're not pivoting just for the sake of pivoting. So thank you again for joining me for this latest podcast. I hope that you found the topics and my views to be thought-provoking and helpful with your thoughts in the development of your own business. I look forward to sharing further views with you next time in my next podcast, Just a View.